Hello, my name is Rachel Blinoff-Mudd, and I'm an instructional content specialist here at ICEV. Thank you for joining me for this session, Accessible Teaching Strategies for All Learners. I hope you stick around for the live Q&A at the end of the session. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we will get going. I've included my email here on the front page. If you have any questions about this content or about ICEV, please feel free to email me. In today's session, we're going to cover 3 strategies that I frequently used as a teacher in the classroom to ensure my students all had access to the instructional content. I will be covering graphic organizers, vocabulary strategies, choice boards, and then at the end, we'll be closing with some additional tips and tricks. First and foremost, I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to know your student by name and need. If we explicitly know a student's needs, we can then intentionally use differentiation strategies for them. I get this going right off the bat at the beginning of the school year by doing some get to know you activities. I do a whole bunch throughout like the first month of school, but the one that I relied on heavily was a private survey that I sent out to students via Google Form, where one of the questions I explicitly asked them anything I might need to know about them. And I also asked them, what can I do as a teacher to make them a successful learner? If you have any awesome get to know you activities that help you get to know your students' need, I would love to hear them. Please share them in the chat box. I've also found that doing frequent check-ins with students allowed me to understand what's going well for a student and what is not. So I would do both individual check-ins and group check-ins regularly. One of the ways I did this is at the end of every unit, I asked students to do a self-evaluation, again through Google Forms. And one of the questions was, what's something that helped you learn this unit? And what's something that you did not understand this unit? And that helps me kind of reflect on my own teaching practices and adjust to meet the needs of my students. Also, it's super important that you're an active member of the IEP and 504 team. Not only is your input needed to develop strategy as the student progresses, but it's also super important that you understand how you can support the student and that you know who you can ask if you have any questions about supporting the student. Finally, I think at this point, we have all seen the TED Talk, Everyone Needs a Champion by Rita Pierson. If you haven't, go watch it. But it really emphasizes the power of positive relationships in the classroom. Studies over the past 30 years have proven positive relationships with your students enable these feelings of trust and safety, which then results in deeper thinking and increased engagement with your students. So I first and foremost, before you even dive into the strategies, take the time to get to know your students and what they need to be successful. So our first awesome strategy that you can use to help students with content is graphic organizers. Graphic organizers are really great for supporting students who may have difficulty with reading or writing, or maybe they have trouble comprehending complex information. Graphic organizers are the answer. Graphic organizers can be used to organize content, to clarify content and break it down, to simplify it for the students. They're also help facilitate cognitive processes. They can even be used to facilitate critical thinking and improve student comprehension. What I love about graphic organizers is you can tailor them to fit any activity. You can make them fit for any student. They're not set in stone. I've spent lots of time in Google Drawings creating my own graphic organizers. I've also had my advanced students create graphic organizers for the students that are struggling. That helps both of them. So some ways you can utilize graphic organizers. They really are endless. I've used them for brainstorming before writing. You can use them to plan out your writing and organize ideas in your writing. You can use Venn diagrams for comparing and contrasting 2 different topics. Graphic organizers are also great for linking concepts and ideas across multiple units. In the classroom, I would have ongoing graphic organizers that students would add to as we progress through the year. Using a graphic organizer can help diagram cause and effect relationships. You'll see in the next vocabulary strategies, graphic organizers are perfect for learning new vocabulary terms. They're also useful to outline detailed processes. I think a graphic organizer would be a great opportunity for your student to use instead of the key concepts that comes with ICEV's lesson plans. The key concepts sometimes can be overwhelming with all the words. So there's an opportunity there for a graphic organizer to break that content down a little better for students that might feel overwhelmed. I encourage you to think how graphic organizers might be able to be used in your classroom because the options are truly endless. Another strategy I relied on a lot in the classroom was front-loading vocabulary. I specifically did this for my English language learners, but I saw it help students across the board, regardless of what their need was. This is also a great strategy if maybe you're doing a lesson that's super heavy in industry-specific terms that the students don't know. This will help get them exposure to those terms. So the idea is before you get into the lesson, you take time to expose students to that new vocabulary so they're prepared for the content. My approach is not to force students to memorize. My goal is exposure, and then doing these strategies, they have reference sheets of the vocab that they can go back to throughout the lesson or throughout the unit. These strategies can easily be used with the ICEV vocabulary handout that comes with each lesson. I'm going to show you some graphic organizer strategies and then some other strategies of just using vocab. But make sure if you use these strategies with your students, you model how to use it before just sending them off. So the first one is one of the easiest ways. It's a form of a graphic organizer. It's called the KIMS strategy. It's very low prep. You don't need to do much, but it still yields some great results. So what the student does is they make a 4 by however many vocabulary terms you have. So you have a K column, an I column, an M column, and an S column. In the K column, that's where they'll put the keyword, the vocab word. In the I column, they will define that vocab words. I always ask them to do it in their own words. It's not just a copy and paste kind of deal. In the M column, M stands for mnemonic or memory aid, and this is where students can do whatever makes sense to them. So maybe they want to draw a picture to represent the word. Maybe they want to do describe a relationship that word might have to something else. Maybe they want to use a mnemonic device. It's totally up to the student. And this is the essential part, is that they're making that connection to something that already exists in their brain. And then the S part is optional. It stands for sentence. In this column is where students would use that word in a sentence. So I would have students do this at the beginning of the unit, and they would just have a page full of their KIMS, and they could go back and reference if they forgot what the word meant. They could go back and look at it as needed. Another vocab strategy that's kind of similar to KIMS is the Frayer model. Yes, it's another graphic organizer. I love graphic organizers. This method gives a little more analysis to the word and synthesis of what the word means than the KIMS model. In this one, the students will write the word in the oval in the middle. They'll define the word in the upper left-hand corner, again, in their own words. On the right-hand corner, they'll write any facts or characteristics about the word. This is especially useful if you are like covering tools or equipment that are specific to your industry. And then the bottom is where students are going to give examples or non-examples. So the bottom left is examples. That's where students would give examples, and on the right is non-examples. I've also seen this swapped out for synonyms or antonyms. So for example, if the word is democracy, in examples, they could write United States, they could write Congress, president, vote. They could write words that are examples of democracy, and in non-examples, they could write authoritarian or North Korea, or things that they know are non-examples of democracy. I've also seen a version of this where there's an extra box added for students to draw or add a picture to represent the vocab word. I've revisited the Frayer model at the end of the unit as a review, where students will pull out their Frayer models and they'll actually put a piece of tape over the word in the middle, and then they swap them with partners, and they have to figure out what the word is based on the 4 boxes. So that's a fun little review activity if you've already done that front-loading vocabulary. Using a word web is another great way that a graphic organizer can be incorporated with front-loading vocab. It's kind of a different approach. The vocab word is written in the middle, and then the outer boxes, students will link important information. So you as the teacher would say like what needs to go in the outward circles, depending on what you want them to find. As someone who taught in the medical field, I would have them break down the prefixes and the suffixes and break down the word. I would have them include it in a sentence or find an example online. You can do synonyms, antonyms, parts of speech. You can have them define it. The options are really endless. It just depends on what's important for them to know about the word. So those were the 3 graphic organizer examples of utilizing vocab. Again, it's both great for English language learners. It's really great for all students, but it does take a little bit more time. These next few strategies are a little bit quicker, but they do require the students to have a deeper understanding of the words. So any opportunity you have to connect the vocabulary with the real world, it's easier for students to understand. If I was covering new vocabulary specific to my industry, I would bring in props and examples. If they wanted to know what an IV bag was, I would bring in an IV bag for them to look, to touch, to feel. Any opportunity you have to connect to the real world will really benefit your students. Another strategy I've used for vocabulary is called a vocab scavenger hunt. And in this, students will use different resources to find sentences where the word is used. Depending on your student, it could be broad where they have to find it, or you could provide those resources for them. This is a great way to get an understanding of the word and how it's used in real world language. And usually while the students are doing this activity, they're also being exposed to other content specific vocab that they can use with that word. So it's good for them. It's kind of like a model for them. Another activity I've done is, I called it Caption It, where I provided students with a picture and I gave them a list of vocabulary words, and then they had to write a caption for the picture using key vocabulary. This one was specific to one of my anatomy classes. The students had to use names of the bones and movements to describe these skeleton movements. But you can do this with anything. There's some really cool pictures out there of your industry specific content where students could apply that key vocabulary. I've also used a lot of ed tech apps for vocabulary in the classroom. They offer a little bit more of a fun way to do it. You can use Kahoot both in person or asynchronously. Students can play a game and review the words. Quizlet was my students' favorite. Quizlet does a couple different things. It offers vocabulary-based games. So you create a vocabulary list, or the student creates a vocabulary list that they then can play games on their own using those words and matching the definitions. Or you can utilize the Quizlet Live, which is what my students absolutely loved. It looks like this picture on the right. So students get in groups. Everybody has to have their device, or some device, a phone, a computer, a tablet, and they work together to match the definitions to the words. If you haven't tried it in your classroom, I really highly recommend it. Pear Deck Flashcard Factory, it's just virtual flashcards, but also a great opportunity for students to review those key vocab words. When students are able to connect vocab to a word or a concept or something going on in their life, they're way more likely to recommend it. So one strategy I used is connecting to pop culture. I had students create memes about different vocabulary words. So I would give them a list of the vocabulary words, and they would pick a couple to create a meme that demonstrates their understanding of the vocabulary word. This was really fun to do because then we'd put them up around the class and do gallery walks, and students would have a really good time seeing everybody's memes laughing. Another popular vocab strategy I used in my classroom was playing games using the words. In my class, we had Taboo sets. So if you've played Taboo before, you get these cards. These were what the ones looked like in my class. You get a card. At the top, it has a word, and then you try to explain this word to your team without saying the buzzword. So the 3 words would be plunge, small, and measure. You cannot say those words while describing a micropipette. If your team says the word, you get a point, and you try to see which team gets the most points. So I had a DIY Taboo sets based on the unit that my students can play if we had some downtime. You could also have students create their own taboo sets. That's a little bit easier on the teacher if you have each group create a couple words, a couple cards. If you have any great vocabulary strategies that your students love, please, please, please share them in the chat box. I'm a big advocate for sharing our knowledge so we can be better teachers for our students. Okay, the next strategy is choice boards. We all know that our students are not one size fits all, which is why I like to incorporate choice boards. What a choice board is, it's a collection of activities that students can choose from. They're great because they increase student ownership. It increases their motivation if they actually got to pick what they get to do. They can easily be adapted to fit the students' needs. I've had different versions of the same choice board to give to different students. And choice boards are actually an element of universal lesson design because it ensures that the student really gets to pick an activity or a strategy to show or share their knowledge that they're comfortable with. So here's an example of a choice board for a vocabulary activity. You can see the activities vary in rigor, so students can pick what's best for them. This choice board specifically could also be used as a tic-tac-toe board. So I would say, okay, you have to pick 3 of these activities and they all have to be in a line. So I kind of organize this in a way where no matter where they go, if they go across, if they go down, if they go diagonal, they're still getting the same rigor of activities. It just depends on what the student wants. Maybe they're not comfortable filming themselves and they're not going to record a TikTok, but maybe they love drawing, so they want to create that mini movie poster showcasing the word. Using the tic-tac-toe strategy, I like because no matter which way the students go, I know all of my students are going to do the Kim's graphic organizer. It doesn't matter, that one's in the middle, they're going to do it. I've seen some people utilize that as a free space. It's really up to the teacher and it's super wonderful. Here's another one using the same, I took the same options and I put them just in a different layout. So I would give this to my students and I would say, okay, you have to do 5 points. So they have the option to do any combination of these activities as long as it adds up to 5 points. And then I would usually just pick the more challenging activity and grade that one. So it's totally open to what works for you. Here's some tips and tricks on how to make a choice board. So right off, the first thing you're going to need to do is choose the concept and the standards the students are going to be using or you're going to be using in the choice board. Determine how many options or requirements the students are going to meet. Are you going to do tic-tac-toe? Are they just going to pick one? Are they going to pick 2? Are they going to do the point system? What do you want them to do? You just create a table in a Word document or a slides document in Google, whatever works for you, create a table. And then this is the hard part. Step 4 is you need to consider all the types of multiple intelligences that students could use. And there's a lot. I think I counted 11 I came up with. It could be music, kinesthetic, computer, culinary, math. Maybe they're really good at writing. You want to make sure your choice board addresses all of those multiple intelligences so students have the opportunity to do what works for them. Then you want to connect those multiple intelligences to activities that connect to the concept and the standards. And then you'll just add those activities onto your document. It really is an ongoing process. I'll find 1 year I'll use this choice board and then I'll swap one of the topics out, one of the activities out for a different one because it didn't work or it was too easy. So just be open to constantly changing it or adding to it, whatever works for you. So finally, we're going to end here with some last set of tips and tricks you can use to ensure all your students are able to learn in your classroom. I really encourage you to let your students work in groups or partners when possible. It's a great opportunity for students who might be behind to work with an advanced student. They can help each other out. It's great for both students in that scenario. If you can be strategic with how they're grouped or how they're partnered, students will definitely benefit from working with others. When you're giving out instructions or you're showing them a technique, make sure you're modeling it for them. Some students cannot learn by just reading, so you do need to show them. And this kind of plays into my next one. If you can record your lectures and instructions, or if you're doing a technique, if you could record it for students to rewatch if needed. That will save you a lot of time, and the student will have that option to review it if they feel like it's needed and they're not embarrassed to ask you. I really like using the free app Loom to record my lectures for students to access, and I post that on my LMS so my students can get to it no matter where they are if they need it. It's also beneficial for your students if you can provide some student examples for them. I like to give a bad student example and a good student example so they know where to aim. I'm also a huge advocate for letting our students talk. The more we can give them time to talk about the content, the more they're going to learn, the more beneficial it's going to be for them. It's also important that you're thinking about your students' focus and chunking your material into 10-minute segments. Studies have shown students, adolescents have about an 8-minute focus area. So once we pass that 10-minute mark, we've kind of lost them. So you'll be doing yourself a favor. After 10 minutes, you can chunk it and move on to the next thing. And maybe you'll have to revisit the lecture. That's totally okay. It's also super important to maintain your classroom routines. Students, they know what to expect. They know what to prepare for during their time in your classroom. That will be beneficial to some different behaviors you might be seeing. And finally, if you could incorporate in visual aids wherever, whenever possible, that would benefit your students as well. It gives them more opportunity to connect material to what they know and process the material. If you have any other successful tips or tricks to support students that I haven't covered, please, please, please feel free to share them in the chat box. Thank you so much for joining my session. You're automatically going to be awarded points for attending this session. And at the end of the conference, you will receive a digital certificate that notes how many sessions you attended. I'm looking forward to seeing you all at the live Q&A right after this.